My name is David Harris, Harris. I'm the Executive Director of AJC, the American Jewish Committee.
Thank you. Tell me why Jan Karski's legacy is so important right now.
Well, actually, I think it's important at any time because he really represents a moral exemplar. And at any given moment in history, the world needs precisely such people who embody moral courage, intellectual courage, and physical courage, and are completely unafraid to stand up for what they believe in, to act on what they believe in, and to risk the consequences of what they believe in. And Jan Karski, from a very early age until his death, embodied all of those extraordinary traits.
So you met him personally. Tell me about that.
Many times. I first met him in the early 80s, and that was in the context of an attempt by my organization, AJC, working with Polish Americans to construct a conversation between Poles and Jews. Not always an easy subject, but he anchored the conversation. And not just anchored it, he kind of centered it as well, because there were those on the Polish side who wanted nothing to do with the Jews, or conversely, who wanted to sanitize all of Polish history regarding the Jews. And there were those on the Jewish side who wanted nothing to do with Poles. And we found in him an extraordinary partner. He was very much centered and grounded. He was unafraid to say what he believed, and he took us forward. So I knew I was in the presence of greatness even before I understood his whole history. And the more I understood, the more I learned about him, the more I read about him, the more I grasped the fact that this was someone that, had there been the gift of immortality that any of us could have given, it would have been to him.
Wonderful. So what do you think the campaign means today going forward, the Jan Karski National Centennial campaign?
Well, first of all, I think the world is in very short supply of genuine heroes. The word hero itself has become so diminished, so devalued, that we use the word to describe, anyone who gets from first base to second base, under tough circumstances in a baseball game or whatever the case may be. We have to return to the notion of what true heroism means. And above all, it means the expression of human compassion for others in a way that puts your own life on the line in defense of other people who may or may not share your religion or your citizenship or your race. That was Jan Karski. The world desperately needs to understand who Jan Karski was, not just for the sake of history, though it does, but for the sake of itself going forward, because the world needs people like Jan Karski as role models for what can be, what the human spirit can entail. So, to me, the goal of the Centennial exercise should be to try and find ways to create a kind of living, breathing spirit of what Jan Karski stood for. Not just a set of inanimate objects, but to breathe life into young people, to instill in them a sense of what the highest expression of the human spirit can be, because that's what he was.
So you think he's earned his place in history and needs to be studied in the schools?
Oh, absolutely, unquestionably. He should be studied in schools, and he should be studied in houses of worship. Jan Karski his name should be known. And it should be known not just as a historical artifact of someone who lived years and years ago. He should be understood as someone who has meaning in today's world.
And why do you think we haven't known him as well as we should have to date?
Well, I think, among other things, because he was not a self-promoter. And we're so used in today's world to the notion of self-promotion and spin and PR firms surrounding individuals, and people magnifying small moments in their life into these extraordinary self-expressions. He was exactly the opposite. He had extraordinary history, and yet he, in a sense, lived it very modestly, very humbly. You almost had to squeeze it out of him. He certainly did not wear it on his sleeve, far from it.
Right.
So, because of that, most people didn't pay attention.
Right. And do you think it had something to do with, say, historians who didn't really want to look at World War II and Roosevelt and Churchill and their role?
Well, I'm sure that was also an important part of this. After all, here was an eyewitness to the tragedy of history. I mean, here was in effect a human trumpet that was trying to blow the sounds of grief and agony in a sense that were unimaginable. Winston Churchill called the Holocaust a crime without a name because there was no name for it. And so when Jan Karski came to Britain and he came to the United States, he challenged people. And too often they failed to have the imagination to grasp what this man had seen with his own eyes and was telling them. So I'm sure there was embarrassment. But there was also the fact that perhaps here in the United States, it was about another era. It was across the ocean in Poland. It was at another time in history. He had a thick accent. Who knows? But in this case, I have to say better late than never.
Right. And it's so exciting right now that the story of the secret state is being published for the first time in England. There's a possibility of a movie, and many more synergies seem to be occurring.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if Jan Karski were alive if he'd be comfortable with all of this activity and attention.
Yeah.
So he might not be.
Right.
I mean, having known him for easily 15 years, I'm not sure he would have been comfortable with all the attention. On the other hand, not only is he deserving of the attention, but we need it for ourselves, because we need to remind ourselves to what heights the human spirit can rise if only it's motivated by goodness.
Right. And I also want to thank you for all you've done to promote the closeness of Israel and Poland and the Polish-Jewish divide, to bridge that, and just as Jan Karski was a bridge figure. So thank you for that.
Well, I mean, frankly, he was in many respects a role model for that. But I for one, felt that, especially after 1989, Poles and Jews had an extraordinary new opportunity to write an entirely new chapter in our history, and a bright chapter between Poles and Jews, between Poland and Israel, and of course between Poland and the United States. And yes, I like to read history, but I much prefer to be a small part in the writing of history than simply have the privilege of reading history.
Well, thank you so much. It was
my great
wonderful to
pleasure.
talk to you.